Imagine spending decades cultivating not just plants, but a sanctuary, a living testament to your passion and dedication. Every trowel, every seed packet, every rare heirloom variety collected over years of patient searching. Then one day, you come home to find it all gone. We needed the space, they say, as if your life's work was nothing but clutter. But when someone uproots your garden, they shouldn't be surprised when you plant seeds of consequence that will bloom into their worst nightmare. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. For as long as I can remember, my hands have been happiest when covered in soil. My name is Eleanor Walsh, and at 67, I've spent more of my life in gardens than out of them. My late husband Frank and I bought our modest ranch-style home in Millfield, Oregon back in 1985, mainly because of the sprawling quarter-acre backyard that backed up to a small creek. While Frank built his career as an electrical engineer, I transformed our property into what the local newspaper once called Millfield's hidden botanical treasure. I'm not just a hobbyist gardener. I studied horticulture at Oregon State, worked at the county extension office for 15 years, and after retiring, I started a small business propagating rare native plant species for restoration projects. My greenhouse and garden shed weren't just storage spaces, they were my laboratory, my office, and my sanctuary. When Frank passed away 5 years ago, my garden became even more important. The rhythm of the seasons, the daily rituals of watering and pruning, the challenge of coaxing reluctant seeds to life, these things anchored me when grief threatened to sweep me away. My son James and his wife Melissa suggested I sell the house and move to a retirement community, but I couldn't imagine leaving my garden. Instead, we compromised. They moved in with me, along with their 2 teenagers, Zach and Emma. It's temporary, James had assured me. Just until we save enough for a down payment on our own place. 2 years? Tops. That was 4 years ago. The first signs of trouble appeared gradually. Melissa complained about the electricity bill for my greenhouse heaters in winter. James grumbled about the bags of specialized soil components that took up space in the garage. Emma rolled her eyes whenever I asked her to help water during dry spells. Only Zach showed any interest in my garden. At 16, he was a quiet boy who preferred plants to people, something I understood all too well. We spent many weekend mornings together, me teaching him the difference between deadheading and pruning back, him soaking up knowledge like the thirsty roots of a newly transplanted shrub. "Grandma," he asked me one day as we divided iris rhizomes, "why do you keep so many seed catalogs?" I showed him my collection, dozens of carefully preserved catalogs dating back to the 1970s, some from companies long out of business. "These aren't just catalogs, Zach. They're time capsules. Look here." I pointed to a listing for a tomato variety called Radiator Charlie's Mortgage Lifter. This tomato has a story. A man named M.C. Biles bred it during the Great Depression. By crossing 4 different varieties, he sold the seedlings for $1 each, a lot of money back then, and paid off his $6,000 mortgage in 6 years. Zach's eyes widened. "So these old catalogs help you find plants that might disappear otherwise?" Exactly. Some of these varieties aren't commercially available anymore, but I still have their seeds. I led him to my workbench where dozens of labeled mason jars contained carefully dried and stored seeds. "This is living history, Zach. Some of these seeds came from plants my grandmother grew." I didn't notice Melissa standing in the doorway until she spoke. "Mom Walsh, dinner's ready. And James wants to talk to you about something important afterward." The something important turned out to be a proposal that I convert my greenhouse into an apartment for Emma, who was turning 18 and wanted her own space. "It would just need some insulation, drywall, and proper flooring," James explained over pot roast that evening. "I can do most of the work myself on weekends. But where would I put all my plants? By propagation tables? My seed starting setup?" My voice sounded small even to my own ears. Melissa jumped in with practiced efficiency. We thought you could scale back a bit. Focus on just a few garden beds instead of all this. She gestured vaguely toward the backyard visible through the dining room window. You're not getting any younger, Mom Walsh. Wouldn't it be nice to have less maintenance? I looked at my son, searching for understanding in his eyes, but found only the determined look that reminded me so much of his father when Frank had made up his mind about something. We can talk about the details later, James said, clearly considering the matter settled. I'll start drawing up plans this weekend. That night, I couldn't sleep. The thought of dismantling my greenhouse made my chest tight. I got up around midnight and walked outside in my robe, the motion-activated security light illuminating my sanctuary. The gleaming aluminum frame housed hundreds of plants in various stages of growth. Along one wall stood my specialized propagation units where I was nurturing seedlings of Kincaid's lupine, an endangered species I was growing for a restoration project along the Willamette River. I can't give this up, I whispered to a tray of tiny green shoots. I won't. The next morning, I called my old friend Harriet Miller, who had been my supervisor at the extension office before we both retired. They want to do what? Harriet exclaimed, when I explained the situation. Eleanor, that greenhouse is practically a local institution. Do they have any idea how many restoration projects depend on when your native plant starts? I don't think they care, I admitted. To them, it's just Grandma's expensive hobby taking up space that could be used for something practical. This is your house, Harriet reminded me. Your name is on the deed, right? Yes, but I hesitated. They're family, Harriet, and they did move in to help me after Frank died. Help you or help themselves to a mortgage-free living situation? Harriet had never been one to mince words. Listen, why don't you come stay with me for a few days? Get some perspective away from that house. I declined her offer but promised to stand my ground with James and Melissa. For the next 2 weeks, I presented alternatives, converting the rarely used formal dining room into a bedroom for Emma, building a small studio apartment above the detached garage, even offering to help pay for a rental apartment nearby. Each suggestion was met with reasons why it wouldn't work. The dining room doesn't have a separate entrance, Melissa explained. Emma needs her privacy. The garage can't support a second story, James insisted, though he'd never consulted a structural engineer. Apartments in this area are too expensive, they both agreed, which was true enough. Meanwhile, I noticed small changes happening around my garden spaces. Tools would be moved from where I'd left them. Seed trays would be shifted to less optimal positions on the greenhouse benches. One morning, I discovered that someone had unplugged my propagation heating mats, causing an entire tray of rare milk vetch, seedlings to die from cold shock overnight. When I confronted James about it, he looked genuinely confused. Maybe the circuit breaker tripped? That greenhouse pulls a lot of electricity, Mom. I knew better. The rest of the greenhouse had remained powered. Only the specific outlet with my heating mats had been disconnected. But I couldn't prove anything, and accusing my family of sabotage felt like crossing a line I wasn't ready to cross. The situation came to a head on a Tuesday in early April. I had gone to Portland for a Native Plant Society meeting and lunch, with Harriet, planning to return home by early evening. But Harriet's car got a flat tire on the drive back, delaying us for several hours while we waited for roadside assistance. I tried calling James to let him know I'd be late, but the call went straight to voicemail. It was nearly 10 p.m. when Harriet finally dropped me off at my house. The first thing I noticed was a large empty space where my garden shed had stood for over 30 years. In its place was a rectangle of bare dirt. My hands trembling, I rushed to the backyard gate. The security light flickered on, revealing a scene that made my knees buckle. My greenhouse, my beautiful, carefully maintained greenhouse, was completely empty. Every plant, every pot, Every tray and tool was gone. The bare aluminum frame and clear panels stood like a skeleton, stripped of all life. I must have made some sound, because the back door opened and James appeared on the porch. "Mom? Is that you? We weren't expecting you until tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" My voice sounded strange, distant. "I said I'd be back tonight. Where is everything? Where are my plants?" James came down the steps, his expression a mixture of guilt and determination. "We were going to surprise you with a clean slate. The greenhouse is all ready to convert now." "But my plants, my equipment, the endangered seedlings for the river project." I was shouting now, something I rarely did. Melissa appeared behind James. "We saved the important stuff, Mom Walsh. It's all in the garage. We had to make some hard choices about what to keep, but—" "What do you mean, what to keep? None of it was yours to keep or discard." I pushed past them toward the garage, my heart pounding. The garage, which normally housed both their cars, contained only James's truck. Where Melissa's SUV should have stood a pathetic fraction of my gardening life, perhaps 3 dozen pots of common perennials, a few bags of standard potting soil, and a single cardboard box containing basic hand tools. "Where's the rest?" I demanded, my voice barely above a whisper. "Where are my propagation tables, my seed collection, the specialized tools, the rare seedlings?" A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. James and Melissa exchanged glances. "Mom," James began slowly, as if explaining to a child, "You had too much stuff. Some of it was really old or didn't work anymore. We kept the best items, and the rest—" "The rest what?" I prompted when he trailed off. Melissa straightened her shoulders. "We donated what was still usable to the community garden downtown. The rest went to the dump. The dump. My collection of rare seeds, some irreplaceable. My custom-built propagation tables that Frank had made for my 60th birthday. My library of carefully annotated botanical reference books. All thrown away, like garbage. You had no right," I said, my voice so cold I hardly recognized it. "No right at all." "We had every right," Melissa countered. "This house is too cluttered. We needed to free up space. Emma deserves her own room, and that greenhouse was the perfect solution. It's not like you were making money with all those plants anyway." I stared at her, seeing for the first time not a daughter-in-law but a stranger who had invaded my home and was now claiming territory. "Actually, Melissa, I was making money. Those worthless plants you threw away, the Kincaid's lupine seedlings, alone were worth nearly $5,000 to the river restoration project." James blanched. "5,000? But you never said—" "You never asked." I turned to leave the garage, needing to get away before I said something unforgivable. "Grandma?" Zach stood in the doorway, his lanky frame silhouetted against the house. Lights. "I tried to stop them. I really did." His voice broke. "I saved these." He held out a shoebox. Inside were dozens of seed packets, my oldest and most precious varieties, carefully labeled in my own handwriting. "I couldn't save everything, but I remembered what you said about living history." I took the box with trembling hands. "Thank you, Zach?" I looked past him to Emma, who stood on the porch looking uncomfortable. "Did you know about this plan?" She nodded, not meeting my eyes. "Dad said you'd be upset at first, but you'd get over it once you saw how nice my apartment was. Going to be. Get over it. As if my life's work, my passion, my reason for getting up every morning since Frank died was something to get over." "I see." I straightened my back, decision crystallizing in my mind. "Well, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. There won't be an apartment in the greenhouse." "Mom," James began in his most reasonable tone, "we've already started the process. The contractor is coming tomorrow to give us an estimate on the renovation. Cancel it." I walked toward the house, the shoebox of saved seeds clutched to my chest like a shield. "You're being unreasonable," Melissa called after me. "We're just trying to make this house work better for everyone." I stopped and turned. "This house works perfectly well as it is. If it doesn't work for you, perhaps you should consider alternative living arrangements." The shock on their faces would have been comical under different circumstances. "You don't mean that," James said. "Where would we go?" "That's not my concern," I replied, surprised at how steady my voice sounded when inside I was shaking with rage and grief. "You have 30 days to find new accommodations. You can't evict us." Melissa's voice rose sharply. "We're family." "Family doesn't destroy what matters most to someone they claim to love," I said simply. 30 days. I walked into the house, past Emma's open-mouthed stare, up the stairs to my bedroom. I locked the door behind me, set Zach's precious box of saved seeds on my dresser, and finally allowed myself to cry. For my lost plants, for the betrayal, and for the family relationships that would never be the same again. The next morning, I called Harriet and asked if her offer of a place to stay was still open. Then I called my lawyer, Benjamin Atkins, who had handled Frank's estate. By noon, I had an appointment to see him the following day and a small suitcase packed with essentials. I found Zach in the kitchen, eating a sandwich when I came downstairs. "I'm going to stay with a friend for a few days," I told him. "I need some space to think." "Are you really making us move out?" he asked, his young face troubled. "I don't know yet," I answered honestly. "But what happened yesterday crossed a line that can't be uncrossed." "I don't want to move," he said quietly. "I like it here. I like gardening with you." My heart ached. "I know, Zach, and you're welcome in my home and garden any time, no matter what happens. That's a promise." I left before James and Melissa returned from work, leaving a note with Harriet's address and phone number in case of emergency only. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror at the empty space where my garden shed had stood and the hollow shell of my greenhouse. I felt something shift inside me, a hardening, like a seed coat growing tough enough to survive winter before the spring renewal. They had given away my gardening supplies to free up space. Now I would free up their living situation, and unlike them, I would do it legally, ethically, and with the full force of property rights on my side. Harriet's guest bedroom became my sanctuary for the next 3 days. Her cozy bungalow in the Dao historic district of Millfield sat on a small lot, but every inch of outdoor space burst with carefully tended flowers and shrubs. The familiarity of being surrounded by healthy plants soothed my raw nerves even as I plotted my next steps. "You should see your face when you're thinking that hard," Harriet remarked over morning coffee on my 3rd day with her. "I've only seen that expression when you were trying to save that collection of heritage roses from the old Thompson property before the developers bulldozed it." I managed a small smile. "I saved those roses. Took cuttings in the middle of the night and propagated every single variety. And now they're growing in botanical gardens across 3 states. Harriet nodded. "So what's the plan for saving yourself? This time?" "Benjamin says I'm on solid legal ground," I replied, referring to my meeting with the lawyer the previous day. "The house is solely in my name. There's no lease agreement with James and Melissa, no rent payments, nothing that establishes tenant rights beyond the basic protections for cohabitants. He's preparing formal eviction papers as we speak." Harriet whistled low. "You're really going through with it. What choice do I have? They destroyed something irreplaceable." My voice caught. Some of those seeds came from my grandmother's garden in Vermont. Plants that don't exist in commercial catalogs anymore. Decades of careful selection and breeding, just gone. "What about the kids? Especially that grandson of yours, Zach, right? The one who saved some seeds?" The mention of Zach made my heart twist. That's the hardest part. He's 17 now, almost done with high school. He's the only one who understood. what the garden meant to me. And the girl? Emma? 18, just finished high school last month. Entitled and self-absorbed, but what teenager isn't at that age? She's working part-time at the mall and taking a gap year before college. I sighed. She's the reason they wanted to convert my greenhouse, so she could have her own apartment without actually moving out or paying rent. Harriet topped off my coffee. Have you spoken to any of them since you left? James has called several times. I let it go to voicemail. I pulled out my phone and played his most recent message. Mom, please call me back. We need to talk about this reasonably. I understand you're upset about the greenhouse, but making us move out is an extreme overreaction. Melissa is beside herself and the kids are confused. We're family. We can work this out. Harriet made a face. He still doesn't get it, does he? No, I agreed. He doesn't understand that this wasn't about stuff. It was about respect, about honoring boundaries, about recognizing the value of something even if you don't understand it yourself. My phone chimed with a text message. Zach. Grandma, when are you coming home? Dad and Mom are fighting all the time. Can I come see you? I showed the message to Harriet. That poor kid is caught in the middle, she said. What will you tell him? The truth. That he's always welcome to visit me, but I need some time away from his parents right now. I typed a quick reply inviting Zach to meet me at Millfield Park the following afternoon. The park was neutral territory, a public space where James and Melissa couldn't create a scene without embarrassing themselves. I arrived early and found a bench near the community garden section, a bittersweet choice, as I wondered if any of my donated tools and supplies had ended up here. Zach appeared right on time, his lanky frame slouching as teenagers do, hands shoved deep in his pockets. When he spotted me, his pace quickened. Grandma. He folded himself onto the bench beside me and, to my surprise, gave me a quick, fierce hug. Are you okay? I'm managing, I replied. How about you? Things sound tense at home. He shrugged. Dad keeps saying you'll come to your senses and... Mom's talking about lawyers. Emma's mad because she's not getting her apartment now. And you? How do you feel about all this? Zach plucked a dandelion from beside the bench and twirled it between his fingers. I think what they did was wrong. They should have asked you first. He paused. I tried to stop them, Grandma. When the guys with the truck came to take everything away, I stood in front of the greenhouse door. Dad had to physically move me. My heart clenched. Oh, Zach, I'm so sorry you were put in that position. I saved what I could, he continued. Not just the seeds I gave you. I hid some of your special tools in my closet. The grafting knife Grandpa made for you, your favorite pruning shears, the soil testing kit. And I took photos of everything before they cleared it out. He pulled out his phone. I thought maybe it would help, with insurance or something. I stared at him, this remarkable young man who had the foresight to document everything, while the adults around him were acting with such callous disregard. Zach, those photos might be very useful. Would you send them to me? He nodded and tapped at his phone. Already done. Grandma? Are you really making us move out? The directness of his question demanded equal honesty. Yes, I don't see any other way forward. Your parents destroyed something precious to me, something irreplaceable, without consultation or permission. I can't live with people who would do that, even if they're family, especially if they're family. What about me and Emma? You'll always have a place with me, Zach. Always. But you're a minor, so legally you need to stay with your parents. Emma is 18. She can make her own choice. He looked down at his hands. I don't want to lose the garden, or you. You won't lose me, I promised. And as for the garden, well, we can start again, can't we? You saved the most important seeds. The rest is just time and patience. A small smile flickered across his face. Yeah, we can start again. We sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, watching a pair of robins hunt for worms in the newly turned soil of the community garden beds. "There's something else," Zach said finally. "Something I think you should know. Before they got rid of everything, Mom took pictures of all your plant journals and notebooks. She said they might be valuable, that she was going to talk to some publisher or university about selling the information." Cold anger settled in my stomach. "She what?" "She said your research on native plant propagation could be worth money, especially the endangered species stuff." I heard her on the phone with someone from Pacific Northwest University asking about intellectual property rights for horticultural research. This was a new betrayal, one I hadn't anticipated. My research journals contained decades of careful observations, propagation techniques I'd developed through trial and error, crossbreeding experiments with native species, a lifetime of work that Melissa now thought she could sell for profit. "Thank you for telling me, Zach. That's very important information." When I returned to Harriet's house that evening, I called Benjamin Atkins again. His secretary put me through immediately. "Eleanor," Benjamin greeted me, "I was just about to call you. The eviction papers are ready for your signature. 30 days notice as you requested." "Thank you, Benjamin, but there's a new development." I explained what Zach had told me about Melissa photographing my research journals and contacting the university. The line went silent for a moment. "That's attempted theft of intellectual property," he said finally, his tone clipped. "Those journals are your work product, documented over decades. If she's attempting to sell or publish that information without your consent, we have grounds for immediate action." "What kind of action?" "For starters, we can send a cease and desist letter to both Melissa and any institutions she's contacted. We can also use this as grounds to request an expedited eviction, given that she's actively attempting to profit from your property without permission." I considered this. "I don't want to rush the eviction. James and Melissa need time to find a suitable place, especially for Zach's sake. But I do want to stop any attempt to sell my research." "Understood. I'll draft the cease and desist immediately. And Eleanor, I'd suggest you return to your home as soon as possible. The longer you're absent, the more opportunity they have to misappropriate your property." Benjamin was right. As comfortable as Harriet's guest room was, I needed to reclaim my own space. The next morning, I packed my small suitcase and drove back to the house I'd shared with Frank for over 30 years. James's truck was gone when I arrived. He'd be at work, managing the electrical supply warehouse where he'd been employed since college. Melissa's SUV was missing too. She worked part-time as an office manager at a dental practice. I was relieved to face an empty house as I used my key in the front door. Except the house wasn't empty. Emma sat at the kitchen counter scrolling through her phone and munching on cereal despite it being nearly noon. She looked up, startled when I entered. "Grandma, you're back!" "I am," I confirmed, setting down my suitcase. "This is my home after all." Emma had the grace to look uncomfortable. "About what happened with your garden stuff?" "Yes. I just wanted to say I didn't know they were going to throw so much away. Dad said we were just reorganizing things to make space." She twisted a strand of hair around her finger, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. I wouldn't have agreed if I'd known they were getting rid of everything. I studied my granddaughter's face, trying to gauge her sincerity. Emma had always been skilled at telling adults what they wanted to hear when it served her purposes. Still, she seemed genuinely discomfited. "I appreciate you saying that, Emma, but what's done is done. Your parents have made choices that have consequences, and one of those consequences is that you'll all need to find another place to live." Emma's eyes widened. "But where will we go? Dad says the rental market is insane right now." "That's not my concern," I replied, echoing my words from the night of the confrontation. "Your parents are adults with jobs and savings. They'll figure it out." "What about me? And Zach? This isn't fair to us." Life is rarely fair, Emma. Sometimes we suffer the consequences of other people's poor decisions. It's an important lesson. To learn. I moved past her to put on the kettle for tea. My kitchen, at least, seemed untouched by the destructive impulses that had swept through my garden spaces. Emma watched me silently for a moment. So that's it? You're just throwing us out? I'm requiring your parents to find their own housing, as they should have done years ago instead of taking advantage of my hospitality. I measured loose tea into my favorite pottery teapot, a gift from Frank on our 25th anniversary. You're 18 now. You can decide for yourself where you want to live. I can't afford my own place. That's why we were converting the greenhouse, so I could have privacy without the crazy rent prices. Ah, yes, the famous greenhouse apartment. Plan. Implemented without my knowledge or consent, at the cost of my livelihood and passion. I poured hot water over the tea leaves and watched them unfurl. Have you considered getting a roommate? Or perhaps a second job? Many young adults manage to support themselves, you know. Emma stared at me as if I'd suggested she fly to the moon. You're being so mean about this. We're family. Family respects each other's boundaries and property, I countered. Family doesn't destroy what another family member values most. Family certainly doesn't steal research and try to sell it behind someone's back. Emma's face went pale. What are you talking about? Ask your mother about the photos she took of my research journals and her calls to Pacific Northwest University. The tea kettle whistled, breaking the tension. As I poured water into my teapot, the front door opened and Zach came in, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He stopped short when he saw me. Grandma, you came home. His face lit up, then clouded, as he glanced at his sister. Is everything okay? Everything is fine, I assured him. I was just making tea. Would you like some? Sure. He dropped his backpack and took a seat at the counter, deliberately leaving an empty stool between himself and Emma. Did you tell her about Mom's phone calls? He asked his sister. Emma shook her head. She already knows. Zach turned to me. There's more. Mom has a meeting scheduled with some professor tomorrow. I saw it on her calendar on the family computer. Dr. Evelyn Moore from the Botanical Sciences Department. I recognized the name immediately. Evelyn Moore was a respected ethnobotanist who specialized in documenting traditional uses of native plants. We'd crossed paths at conferences several times, though we weren't close. Thank you for telling me, Zach. I poured tea for the three of us, my mind working quickly. Now, I have some news for both of you. I've met with my lawyer, and your parents will be receiving formal eviction papers tomorrow. They'll have 30 days to find new housing arrangements. 30 days isn't long enough to find a decent place, Emma protested. Not in this market. Perhaps they should have thought of that before disposing of my property without permission. I sipped my tea, allowing the familiar comfort of the ritual to steady me. They've had 4 years of rent-free living in which they could have saved for their own home. Their failure to plan does not constitute an emergency on my part. What about us? Zach asked quietly. As I told Emma, she's legally an adult and can make her own housing decisions. You, unfortunately, will need to go where your parents go, at least until you turn 18 next year. I reached across the counter to squeeze his hand. But my door will always be open to you, Zach. Always. The sound of a car in the driveway interrupted our conversation. A moment later, the front door opened and Melissa walked in, her arms full of grocery bags. She froze when she saw me. Eleanor, you're back. Her voice held a false brightness that set my teeth on edge. I am. This is my home, after all. Melissa set the grocery bags on the counter and smoothed her hands down her slacks, another nervous gesture. We should talk about what happened. James and I feel terrible about the misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? I repeated, keeping my voice level. Is that what you call destroying someone's property and livelihood? A misunderstanding? We were trying to help. You're not getting any younger, And all that gardening was becoming too much for you to manage. Melissa glanced at her children. Emma, Zach, could you give us some privacy? Actually, I'd prefer they stay, I countered. This concerns them too, and I believe in being transparent about difficult situations. I fixed Melissa with a steady gaze. Speaking of transparency, I understand you've been photographing my research journals and contacting universities about selling my work. The color drained from Melissa's face. Who told you that? Does it matter? It's true, isn't it? She licked her lips. I was only trying to preserve your legacy. That research is valuable. It shouldn't just sit in notebooks on a shelf. Then perhaps you should have discussed it with me instead of going behind my back after destroying my garden. I took another sip of tea, pleased to note that my hand was steady despite my inner turmoil. I've spoken with my lawyer. You'll be receiving formal eviction papers tomorrow. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. You can't do this, Melissa Zai. Voice rose sharply. We're family. Family doesn't steal from family, I replied evenly. Family doesn't destroy what matters to family. You and James made your choice when you decided my passion was worthless clutter to be discarded. Now I'm making mine. James will never agree to this. We have rights. By all means, consult your own lawyer. Mine assures me that as the sole owner of this property, with no formal rental agreement in place, I am well within my rights to terminate your living arrangement with appropriate notice. Melissa's face contorted with anger. After everything we've done for you, moving in to help after Frank died, taking care of the house, keeping you company, yes, your great sacrifice of living rent-free in a fully paid-off home while saving nothing toward your own future. I set down my teacup with a gentle click. I've made my decision, Melissa. This isn't a negotiation. She stormed out of the kitchen, phone already in hand, presumably to call James. Emma followed after a moment's hesitation, but Zach remained, sipping his tea in contemplative silence. You okay, Grandma? He asked after a while. I considered the question carefully. Was I okay? My garden had been destroyed, my research nearly stolen, my family relationships fractured perhaps beyond repair. And yet beneath the grief and anger, I felt a curious lightness, the liberation of finally setting a boundary that should have been established years ago. I will be, I answered honestly. We both will. Zach nodded, understanding passing between us without need for further words. Outside the kitchen window, I could see the empty greenhouse frame gleaming in the afternoon sun. It looked forlorn, now stripped of life and purpose, but not for long. With Zach's help and the precious seeds he'd saved, we would rebuild. Different, perhaps, but no less vital. They had given away my gardening supplies to free up space. Now I was freeing up their living situation and reclaiming my own in the process. The official eviction notice arrived via certified mail the next day, delivered by a courier who seemed uncomfortable with his task. I signed for it and placed the unopened envelope on the kitchen counter where James would see it when he returned from work. Then I turned my attention to more pressing matters, salvaging what remained of my garden. Armed with the photos Zach had taken before the purge, I created a detailed inventory of everything that had been discarded or donated. The list ran to several pages: specialized propagation equipment, rare plant specimens, custom tools, decades of collected seeds, reference materials, and my precious research journals. I assigned conservative value estimates to each item, knowing I would need this documentation for what would come next. Benjamin had suggested pursuing a civil claim against James and Melissa for the destruction of property. Given the specialized nature and cumulative value of what was lost, we're looking at damages well into the 5-figure range, he'd explained during our last phone call. It might seem harsh to sue your own family, but actions have consequences. They need to understand the full impact of what they've done. I wasn't sure yet if I would take that step. Part of me wanted James and Melissa to face the financial consequences of their actions, but another part, the mother in me, hesitated to push things that far. I decided to wait and see how they responded to the eviction before making that decision. I didn't have to wait long. James arrived home just after 6, his truck tires crunching on the gravel driveway with more force than necessary. The front door slammed. Heavy footsteps crossed the living room toward the kitchen where I sat at the table, reviewing my inventory list. "What the hell is this?" James demanded, waving the still-sealed eviction notice. "Exactly what it appears to be," I replied calmly. "Notice to vacate the premises within 30 days. "This is ridiculous, Mom. You can't just kick us out because you're upset about some old gardening stuff." I set down my pen and looked at my son, truly looked at him, for perhaps the first time in years. When had the laughing boy who used to help Frank build birdhouses become this entitled stranger? When had his eyes developed those hard lines? At the corners, his mouth, that permanent downward tilt. It wasn't some old gardening stuff, James. It was my life's work, my passion, my purpose after your father died, and you destroyed it without a second thought. We were trying to help. That greenhouse was a money pit, and you're not getting any younger. Emma needs her own space. We were just being practical. Practical would have been discussing your concerns with me and exploring alternatives together. Practical would have been respecting that this is my home and those were my possessions to decide about. What you did wasn't practical. It was cruel and calculating. James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father that it made my heart ache despite everything. "Okay, fine. We should have talked to you first. I admit that. But eviction? Come on, Mom. Where are we supposed to go on such short notice? That's not my problem, James. You've had 4 years to save for your own place. 4 years of living here rent-free while I paid the property taxes, utilities, and maintenance costs. What have you done with all that saved money?" His gaze slid away from mine. "The economy's been tough. Melissa had those dental bills last year, and the kids always need something." "The kids," I interrupted, "are hardly children anymore. Emma is 18 and Zach will be 17 next month. Neither requires the expensive childcare that might have justified your extended stay when you first moved in. So that's it? After everything we've done for you, you're just throwing us out? What exactly have you done for me, James? Besides taking advantage of my generosity and then destroying the one thing that brought me joy after your father died?" He had no answer for that. 30 days, I said firmly. "I suggest you start looking for a new place immediately." James stormed. "Out?" The eviction notice crumpled in his fist. I heard the murmur of voices from the living room, James and Melissa in heated conversation. Their voices rose and fell like thunderclouds gathering before a storm. I ignored them and returned to my inventory list. A soft knock at the kitchen door made me look up. Zach stood there, his thin frame silhouetted against the evening light, Kansai. "I come in, Grandma?" "Of course, honey." I patted the chair beside me. "You never need to ask." He slid into the seat and peered at my papers. "What are you working on?" "An inventory of everything that was lost. For insurance purposes, possibly." "Legal action," Zach nodded, his young face solemn. "I have something else for you." He pulled out his phone and opened his photo gallery. "I found Mom's pictures of your research journals. I sent copies to myself before she could delete them." I stared at him in astonishment. "Zach, thank you. That's incredibly helpful." He shrugged, but I could see he was pleased. "I figured if she was going to try to sell your research, you should at least have copies of your own work." "You're a remarkable young man, Zach Walsh." I squeezed his hand. "Your grandfather would be very proud of you." A small smile flickered across his face. "Do you think, when all this is settled, we could start rebuilding the greenhouse together? I have ideas for improvements, more efficient heating, better irrigation systems." "I'd like that very much." The next 2 weeks brought a flurry of activity. James and Melissa, finally accepting that the eviction was happening, began searching for rental properties. Tensions ran high as they discovered what I already knew. Millfield's rental market had tightened considerably in recent years, with prices much higher than they'd anticipated. "There's nothing decent under $2,200 a month," Melissa complained over dinner one evening. "And most places want first and last month's rent plus a security deposit up front. That's nearly $7,000 just to move in." I said nothing, merely continuing to eat my salad. Their financial challenges were of their own making. 4 years of free housing should have resulted in substantial savings, but their habit of living beyond their means had apparently continued even without rental expenses. Meanwhile, I focused on reclaiming my garden spaces. The empty greenhouse still stood, its aluminum frame intact though stripped of purpose. With Zach's help, I began cleaning the interior, preparing to rebuild my plant collection. The space where my garden shed had stood remained a bare patch of earth. But Benjamin had connected me with a contractor who could build a new one, funded by the insurance claim we'd filed for the destroyed property. "I've been sprouting some of the seeds I saved," Zach told me one afternoon as we worked side by side, scrubbing algae from the greenhouse panels. "In my room, under grow lights, I bought with my allowance. The Kincaid's lupine seedlings are doing really well." Pride swelled in my chest. "You remembered the specific germination requirements? The cold stratification period?" He nodded, his face serious. "I've been reading your propagation notes for years, Grandma. I wanted to make sure they survived. When they're ready for transplanting, we'll move them here," I promised. "They'll be the first residents of our new greenhouse." Emma remained conspicuously absent from these garden restoration efforts. She'd taken to spending most of her time away from the house, presumably with friends, returning late and leaving early. When our paths did cross, her responses to my polite inquiries were terse, her expression closed. On the 17th day after the eviction notice, I'd been counting, Harriet called with unexpected news. "You'll never guess who I ran into at the farmer's market," she said without preamble. "Dr. Evelyn Moore from Pacific Northwest University. We got to talking and your name came up." My stomach tightened. "What did she say?" "She mentioned being contacted by someone claiming to have access to your research journals, decades of propagation techniques for endangered native species. She was quite excited about it until I informed her that this someone had no right to sell your work and had in fact destroyed much of your actual plant collection." How did she react? Like any ethical academic would, with horror and immediate assurance that she would have no part in such a scheme. She also mentioned that she'd love to speak with you directly about your work, properly attributed and compensated. A weight I hadn't realized I was carrying lifted from my shoulders. "Thank you, Harriet. That's one worry resolved, at least." "There's more," Harriet continued. "I told her about what happened to your greenhouse and garden shed. She was outraged, especially about the rare specimens that were lost. She's interested in partnering with you on a grant proposal, a project to document and preserve propagation techniques for endangered Northwest natives, with funding for a new state-of-the-art greenhouse facility." I nearly dropped the phone. "Are you serious?" "Completely. She wants to meet with you next week to discuss details. It could be substantial funding, Eleanor. Enough to not only replace what you lost, but expand your work significantly." After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen chair, stunned by this unexpected turn of events. A grant-funded greenhouse project would give me resources I'd never had access to before. New equipment, assistant positions for student researchers, publication opportunities, and with Pacific Northwest University's involvement, there would be institutional support for preserving the techniques I'd spent decades perfecting. The irony wasn't lost on me. Melissa's attempt to profit from my research without permission had backfired spectacularly, potentially leading to the most significant professional opportunity of my life. I was still processing this news when the doorbell rang. Benjamin Atkins stood on my porch, leather briefcase in hand. "Eleanor," he greeted me. "May I come in? There's been a development I wanted to discuss in person rather than over the phone." I led him to the living room, anxiety crowding out my earlier elation. Had James and Melissa filed some legal countermeasure against the eviction? Benjamin settled into an armchair and opened his briefcase. "I received an interesting call this morning from a real estate attorney representing your son and daughter-in-law. It seems they found a property they'd like to purchase, but they're having difficulty securing financing." "What does that have to do with me?" "They're requesting that you co-sign the mortgage loan. Given their employment history and credit scores, the bank is requiring a substantial down payment they don't have, or a co-signer with significant assets." Benjamin looked at me over his reading glasses. "I told their attorney I would convey the request, but advised that given recent events, I didn't see it as a viable option." I sat back, momentarily speechless. The audacity was breathtaking. After destroying my property, attempting to steal my research, and fighting the eviction, they now wanted me to put my financial security on the line for them? "No," I said finally. "Absolutely not. I will not co-sign a loan for them under any circumstances." Benjamin nodded, unsurprised. I thought as much, but professional obligation required me to ask. "I'll convey your answer." He hesitated. "There's one more thing. In my conversations with their attorney, I learned they're pursuing a specific property, the Donovan Place on Maple Street. I knew it immediately, a charming craftsman bungalow just 6 blocks from my home. It had been on the market for several months, its asking price slightly above comparable properties in the area. "That's an ambitious choice," I said carefully. "The Donovan house must be listed at around $450,000. $475,000, Benjamin confirmed. "Well above what they could reasonably afford based on the financial information they've provided to the lender." A suspicion formed in my mind. They want me to co-sign not because they need help qualifying for a loan, but because they're reaching beyond their means. Again. That would be my assessment as well. After Benjamin left, I sat in my living room, turning over this new information. The grant opportunity with Dr. Moore represented a path forward for my research and passion. James and Melissa's loan request represented a backward slide into the same dysfunctional dynamic that had led to our current situation. The choice was clear, but still difficult. They were family, after all. That evening at dinner, a strained affair with all 4 of them present, James cleared his throat after the dessert plates had been cleared. "Mom, we need to talk about something important. Melissa and I have found a house we'd like to buy." "The Donovan Place on Maple Street," I said, nodding. "Benjamin told me." James looked startled, then recovered. "Yes, that's the one. It's perfect for us. Good neighborhood, enough bedrooms for everyone, close to both our jobs. But with the current lending market, we need a cosigner to secure the mortgage." "I see. We're hoping you'll help us with this," Melissa added, her tone sweetly reasonable. "It would be a good investment for you too. Property values in that neighborhood are projected to increase steadily." I studied their faces, James hopeful but with a hint of entitlement, Melissa carefully composed in what I now recognized as her manipulation expression, Emma overtly disinterested, though clearly listening, and Zach watching me with quiet intensity. "No," I said simply. James blinked. "No? Just like that?" "Just like that. I will not co-sign a loan for you." "But Mom, this is our future we're talking about. The kids' future." "Indeed. And as adults responsible for your children's future, you should make financial decisions within your actual means, not rely on me to underwrite aspirational purchases." Melissa's pleasant facade cracked. "This is because of the greenhouse, isn't it? You're punishing us over a bunch of plants." "No, Melissa. I'm simply declining to take on significant financial liability for individuals who have demonstrated profound disrespect for my property and boundaries. Your actions have consequences. This is one of them." You know what? Fine. James pushed back from the table, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. We don't need your help. We'll find our own place without your charity. That's precisely what the eviction notice was meant to accomplish, I replied calmly. I'm glad we're finally in agreement. He stormed out, Melissa following after shooting me a venomous glare. Emma slipped away without comment, leaving only Zach at the table with me. Grandma? He said after a moment. I have a request. What is it, honey? When they find a new place, would it be okay if I spent weekends here with you? To work on the garden? I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Always. This will always be a home for you. The next morning, I met with Dr. Evelyn Moore at a small cafe downtown. Harriet joined us, her presence a comfort as I explained the full scope of my research and the recent destruction of my greenhouse and plant collection. This is exactly the kind of traditional ecological knowledge our department aims to preserve, Dr. Moore said, her enthusiasm evident. Your propagation techniques for these endangered native species could be crucial for restoration projects throughout the Pacific Northwest. I've been doing this work for decades with minimal resources, I told her. Imagine what could be accomplished with proper funding and institutional support. That's precisely what I have in mind. The Lawrence Foundation has a grant program specifically for biodiversity preservation projects. With your expertise and our university's resources, I believe we have an excellent chance of securing significant funding. As she outlined her vision, a collaborative research project, publication opportunities, a new greenhouse facility that would serve both as a propagation center and educational resource, I felt a spark of excitement I hadn't experienced in years. The grant proposal deadline is in 3 weeks, Dr. Moore concluded. Can I count on your participation, Eleanor? I glanced at Harriet, who gave me an encouraging nod. Yes, I decided. I'm all in. Walking home from the cafe, I felt lighter than I had in months. The destruction of my greenhouse had been devastating, but from that loss, new opportunities were emerging. Opportunities that might never have materialized had James and Melissa not forced this reckoning. They had given away my gardening supplies to free up space. In doing so, they had unwittingly created space for something much bigger to grow in its place. Like a forest after a fire, new life was already pushing through the ash and devastation, reaching toward the light. The grant proposal consumed my days and nights over the next 3 weeks. Dr. Moore proved to be an excellent collaborator, knowledgeable, efficient, and genuinely respectful of my expertise. We worked primarily at her office on campus, which provided a welcome respite from the increasingly tense atmosphere at home. James and Melissa had shifted tactics, moving from anger to a calculated chill that permeated the house. They spoke to me only when absolutely necessary, their responses clipped and formal. Emma followed their lead, avoiding me entirely. Only Zach maintained his warm relationship with me, though he was careful to do so out of his parents' sight. They're looking at apartments now, he informed me one afternoon as we worked in the partially restored greenhouse. Smaller places, more in their actual price range. Dad's really mad about the Donovan house. I imagine he is, I replied, carefully, transferring a tiny seedling to a larger pot. It was a lovely home. Emma's furious about having to share a bedroom again. She keeps saying she'll move in with friends instead, but Dad says she can't afford it on her mall job salary. I nodded, unsurprised. Emma had always had champagne tastes on a tap water budget. And how do you feel about all this, Zach? He shrugged, focusing intently on the row of pots he was filling with specialized soil mix. I don't care where we live as long as I can still come here on weekends. And I graduate next year anyway. I'm hoping to study horticulture at Pacific Northwest University. My hand stilled. You never mentioned that before. A flush crept up his neck. I wasn't sure if it was a stupid idea. Dad always said there's no money in plants unless you own a massive commercial nursery. Your father, I said carefully, has a very limited perspective on what constitutes meaningful work. Horticulture is a broad field with many career paths: restoration, ecology, landscape architecture, botanical research, urban forestry. Dr. Moore mentioned that PNU has one of the best programs in the country, with excellent scholarship opportunities. Hope flickered across his face. Really? Do you think... Could you maybe introduce me to her? Before application season? I'd be delighted to. In fact, we're including a student apprenticeship component in our grant proposal. If it's funded, there could be opportunities for undergraduate involvement. For the first time since the greenhouse destruction, Zach's smile reached his eyes. That would be amazing, Grandma. As the eviction deadline approached, James and Melissa finally secured a 3-bedroom apartment in a newer complex on the edge of town. The rent was indeed steep, $2,100 per month plus utilities, but within their combined income range if they budgeted carefully. They scheduled the move for the final weekend of the 30-day period, cutting it as close as possible to the deadline. Maintained a careful distance from their preparations, neither helping nor hindering. Emma's complaints about the smaller space and shared bathroom echoed through the house, while James and Melissa engaged in tense discussions about which furniture would fit in their new quarters. The sectional sofa won't work in the apartment. Living room, Melissa announced at dinner 4 days before the move. We'll need to get something smaller. We can't afford new furniture on top of all these moving expenses, James replied, frustration evident in his voice. We'll make it fit. It physically won't fit through the apartment door, James, I measured. Then we'll leave it here and buy something when we can afford it. I cleared my throat. Actually, that sectional belongs to this house. Frank and I purchased it when we redecorated after Zach was born. Silence fell around the table. James stared at me, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. What are you talking about? We've been using that couch for years. Using it, yes. But it was never yours to take. The same applies to the dining set, the master bedroom furniture, and the major appliances. All of those items belong to me and will be staying in this house. Melissa's face flushed with anger. You can't be serious. You expect us to furnish an entire apartment from scratch? I expect you to take what belongs to you and leave what doesn't, I replied evenly. Just as I would have expected you to discuss the disposal of my gardening equipment with me before giving it away. This is completely different, James protested. Is it? My property was disposed of without my permission because someone else decided they needed the space. Now you wish to remove my furniture because you need to fill your space. The principle seems identical to me. But we need that furniture. We can't afford to replace everything at once. Perhaps you should have considered that before destroying thousands of dollars worth of my gardening equipment and plants. I dabbed my lips with a napkin and stood. I've prepared an itemized list of what belongs to the house and what you may take with you. I'll leave it on the counter for your reference. I walked away from the table, their angry muttering fading behind me. In the solitude of my bedroom, I took several deep breaths, steadying myself. This confrontation had been necessary but unpleasant. I wasn't being vindictive. Everything on my list legitimately belonged to the house. But I knew James and Melissa would see it as further punishment. The next morning, a certified letter arrived from Pacific Northwest University. I recognized Dr. Moore's name in the return address and opened it with trembling fingers. Dear Eleanor, the enclosed note read on university letterhead, I'm delighted to inform you that our pre-proposal to the Lawrence Foundation has been selected for full proposal development. This is the first hurdle cleared. The Foundation was particularly interested in your propagation techniques for endangered native species and the potential for creating a community education component. Please call me as soon as possible to discuss next steps. Joy bubbled up within me, pure, unfettered joy that I hadn't experienced since before Frank's death. I immediately called Dr. Moore, who confirmed the exciting news. The full proposal is due in 6 weeks, she explained. But the Foundation program officer gave us very positive feedback. She believes our project aligns perfectly with their funding priorities this year. This is wonderful news, Evelyn. Truly wonderful. There's more, she continued. The department chair has authorized a small planning grant to get us started while we wait for the foundation's decision. $10,000 to begin designing the new greenhouse facility and developing the propagation protocols for publication. $10,000. Enough to replace some of my specialized equipment, begin rebuilding my rare plant collection, and perhaps even construct a proper security system to protect it all. When can we start? I asked, unable to keep the excitement from my voice. How about tomorrow? 9 a.m. at my office? We can begin ordering equipment immediately. After hanging up, I stood in my kitchen, the letter clutched to my chest, tears of vindication and relief streaming down my face. This grant opportunity represented more than just financial support. It was professional validation of work I'd pursued largely in isolation for decades. A noise from the doorway made me look up. Zach stood there, a concerned expression on his face. Grandma? Are you okay? I wiped my eyes, smiling through the tears. More than okay, honey. Come see this. I showed him the letter, explaining what it meant. His face lit up with genuine happiness for me. This is incredible. Will you be able to replace everything that was lost? Not everything. Some of those plants and seeds were irreplaceable, but we can start anew with what remains and perhaps create something even better. We? He repeated, testing the word. You mean you and Dr. Moore? I mean all of us. Dr. Moore, her department, and yes, you too, if you're interested. The grant includes funding for student assistance, and while you're not in college yet, there's no reason you couldn't volunteer. Learn the ropes before you apply to the program. The hope that bloomed on his young face was as tender and promising as the seedlings we'd been nurturing in the greenhouse. I'd like that. A lot. The moving day arrived with a flurry of activity. James had rented a truck, and he and Melissa spent the morning loading boxes and the furniture that was legitimately theirs to take. Mostly their bedroom set, the kids' furniture, and personal items. The gaps left by what stayed behind were conspicuous. No dining table, no living room seating, no master bedroom furniture besides what they'd purchased themselves in recent years. Emma stomped around, making her displeasure known through sighs, and slammed doors rather than words. Zach quietly packed his things, methodically labeling boxes with their contents. I stayed out of their way, working in the greenhouse, returning to the house only when I heard the moving truck depart for its first run to the apartment. I found Zach in the kitchen, sitting alone at the counter with a sandwich. They'll be back. For the second load soon, he said. Emma went with them to start unpacking. I nodded, pouring myself a glass of water. How are you holding up? I'm okay. He looked around the half-empty kitchen, cupboard doors standing open where items had been removed. It's weird, though. Like the house is breathing differently. That's a lovely way to put it. Grandma? His voice took on a hesitant quality. I know I have to go with them. Legally, I mean, since I'm still a minor. But I was wondering, yes? Could I stay here sometimes? Not just weekends. Maybe a few. Nights during the week, too? The apartment is pretty far from school, and with the greenhouse project starting. My heart swelled. Of course you can, honey. This is your home, too. Always. Relief washed over his face. Thanks. I wasn't sure, with everything that's happened. Listen to me, Zach. I placed my hands on his shoulders, making sure he met my eyes. The difficulties between your parents and me have nothing to do with my relationship with you. Nothing will ever change how much I love you or how welcome you are in this house. He nodded, blinking rapidly. I should finish packing my room before they get back. After he left, I walked through the house, taking stock of the strange half-emptiness. James and Melissa had been carefully thorough about removing only what was theirs, likely fearing legal repercussions if they took items from my list of house property. The result was a home in transition, not quite empty enough to feel abandoned, but missing too many pieces to feel fully inhabited. I would need to purchase some new furniture eventually, but for now, the space itself was the treasure. Space. To breathe, to think, to begin again without walking on eggshells in my own home. Frank would have hated the family discord, but understood my need to reclaim my territory. The sound of the moving truck returning interrupted my thoughts. Through the front window, I watched James back the vehicle into the driveway with more care than necessary, clearly avoiding the flower beds that lined the approach. Small mercies. The second round of loading went quickly. By late afternoon, the truck was filled with the last of their belongings. James did a final walkthrough while Melissa waited in their car, her posture stiff even from a distance. "I think that's everything," James said when he returned to the front porch where I stood watching. "We've left the keys on the kitchen counter." "Thank you." I nodded, maintaining a polite but distant demeanor. He shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, I know you're still angry about what happened, but this feels extreme. Breaking up the family like this." "I didn't break up the family, James. I simply enforced boundaries that should have been respected from the beginning." "But where does this leave us? Are we just done? Over some plants?" I sighed, weariness settling over me. "It was never just some plants, and you know that. It was about respect. Respect for my home, my work, my passion. You and Melissa showed none. That's what this is about. So that's it? You're choosing your garden over your family." "No, James. I'm choosing myself, my dignity, and my right to be treated with respect in my own home. The fact that you still don't understand that is precisely why this separation is necessary." He shook his head, frustration evident in the set of his shoulders. "Zach wants to spend time here. Nights, even during the week. Melissa and I have discussed it, and we won't stand in his way. He seems to have a real connection with this place, with gardening. He does. He has a gift for it, just as I did at his age." "Yeah, well." James looked away. "I guess one good thing came out of all this mess. He found his passion." A pause. He never connected with anything like that before. Not sports or music, or any of the things I tried to interest him in. For the first time in weeks, I glimpsed the son I'd raised, the thoughtful man beneath the entitled behavior that had emerged during their extended stay. Different people find meaning in different pursuits, James. Your father loved working with his hands, building things. You preferred team sports and business. Zach's heart is in growing things. It's all valuable." He nodded slowly. "I should go. They're waiting." "James." I stopped him as he turned to leave. "This rift between us, it doesn't have to be permanent. But healing will require genuine understanding of why what happened was so devastating to me. Not just surface apologies, or attempts to minimize the loss." Something flickered in his eyes, not quite understanding, but perhaps the beginning of it. "I'll think about that. Goodbye, Mom." I watched them drive away, James in the moving truck, Melissa and Emma in their SUV, Zach's lanky frame visible in the back seat. His head turned to watch the house until they rounded the corner and disappeared. The silence they left behind felt sacred, like a cathedral emptied after a tumultuous service. I walked through each room slowly, reacquainting myself with my home as it existed without the constant presence of others. In the kitchen, I found a small pot of purple violets on the counter beside the abandoned keys, Zach's parting gift, no doubt. Outside, the golden late-afternoon light bathed the yard in a honeyed glow. The greenhouse gleamed, its aluminum frame catching the sun. No longer empty, it now held the beginnings of a new collection. Salvaged plants, newly propagated specimens, and the precious seedlings Zach had rescued and tended. Beside it, the rectangular outline of bare earth where my garden shed had stood now featured neat stakes and string, marking the dimensions of the larger, improved structure the insurance settlement would fund. From destruction, renewal. From loss, opportunity. From painful endings, new beginnings. Joy bubbled up within me, pure, unfettered joy that I hadn't experienced since before Frank's death. I immediately called Dr. Moore, who confirmed the exciting news. The full proposal is due in 6 weeks, she explained. But the foundation, program officer gave us very positive feedback. She believes our project aligns perfectly with their funding priorities this year. This is wonderful news, Evelyn. Truly wonderful. There's more, she continued. The department chair has authorized a small planning grant to get us started while we wait for the foundation's decision. $10,000 to begin designing the new greenhouse facility and developing the propagation protocols for publication. $10,000. Enough to replace some of my specialized equipment, begin rebuilding my rare plant collection, and perhaps even construct a proper security system to protect it all. When can we start? I asked, unable to keep the excitement from my voice. How about tomorrow? 9 a.m. at my office. We can begin ordering equipment immediately. After hanging up, I stood in my kitchen, the letter clutched to my chest, tears of vindication and relief streaming down my face. This grant opportunity represented more than just financial support. It was professional validation of work I'd pursued largely in isolation for decades. A noise from the doorway made me look up. Zach stood there, a concerned expression on his face. "Grandma, are you okay?" I wiped my eyes, smiling through the tears. "More than okay, honey. Come see this." I showed him the letter, explaining what it meant. His face lit up with genuine happiness for me. "This is incredible. Will you be able to replace everything that was lost?" "Not everything. Some of those plants and seeds were irreplaceable, but we can start anew with what remains, and perhaps create something even better." "We," he repeated, testing the word. "You mean you and Dr. Moore?" "I mean all of us. Dr. Moore, her department, and yes, you too, if you're interested. The grant includes funding for student assistance, and while you're not in college yet, there's no reason you couldn't volunteer. Learn the ropes before you apply to the program." The hope that bloomed on his young face was as tender and promising as the seedlings we'd been nurturing in the greenhouse. "I'd like that. A lot." The moving day arrived with a flurry of activity. James had rented a truck, and he and Melissa spent the morning loading boxes and the furniture that was legitimately theirs to take. Mostly their bedroom set, the kids' furniture, and personal items. The gaps left by what stayed behind were conspicuous. No dining table, no living room seating, no master bedroom furniture besides what they'd purchased themselves in recent years. Emma stomped around, making her displeasure known through sighs, and slammed doors rather than words. Zach quietly packed his things, methodically labeling boxes with their contents. I stayed out of their way, working in the greenhouse, returning to the house only when I heard the moving truck depart for its first run to the apartment. I found Zach in the kitchen, sitting alone at the counter with a sandwich. "They'll be back for the second load soon," he said. Emma went with them to start unpacking. I nodded, pouring myself a glass of water. "How are you holding up?" "I'm okay." He looked around the half-empty kitchen, cupboard doors standing open where items had been removed. "It's weird, though. Like the house is breathing differently." "That's a lovely way to put it." "Grandma?" His voice took on a hesitant quality. "I know I have to go with them. Legally, I mean, since I'm still a minor. But I was wondering..." "Yes? Could I stay here sometimes? Not just weekends? Maybe a few. Nights during the week, too? The apartment is pretty far from school, and with the greenhouse project starting." My heart swelled. "Of course you can, honey. This is your home, too. Always." Relief washed over his face. "Thanks. I wasn't sure, with everything that's happened." "Listen to me, Zach." I placed my hands on his shoulders, making sure he met my eyes. The difficulties between your parents and me have nothing to do with my relationship with you. Nothing will ever change how much I love you or how welcome you are in this house." He nodded, blinking rapidly. "I should finish packing my room before they get back." After he left, I walked through the house, taking stock of the strange half-emptiness. James and Melissa had been carefully thorough about removing only what was theirs, likely fearing legal repercussions if they took items from my list of property. The result was a home in transition, not quite empty enough to feel abandoned, but missing too many pieces to feel fully inhabited. I would need to purchase some new furniture eventually, but for now, the space itself was the treasure. Space. To breathe, to think, to begin again without walking on eggshells in my own home. Frank would have hated the family discord, but understood my need to reclaim my territory. The sound of the moving truck returning interrupted my thoughts. Through the front window, I watched James back the vehicle into the driveway with more care than necessary, clearly avoiding the flower beds that lined the approach. Small mercies. The second round of loading went quickly. By late afternoon, the truck was filled with the last of their belongings. James did a final walkthrough while Melissa waited in their car, her posture stiff even from a distance. "I think that's everything," James said when he returned to the front porch where I stood watching. "We've left the keys on the kitchen counter." "Thank you." I nodded, maintaining a polite but distant demeanor. He shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, I know you're still angry about what happened, but this feels extreme. Breaking up the family like this, I didn't break up the family, James. I simply enforced boundaries that should have been respected from the beginning. But where does this leave us? Are we just done? Over some plants?" I sighed, weariness settling over me. It was never just some plants, and you know that. It was about respect. Respect for my home, my work, my passion. You and Melissa showed none. That's what this is about. So that's it? You're choosing. Your garden over your family. No, James, I'm choosing myself. My dignity and my right to be treated with respect in my own home. The fact that you still don't understand that is precisely why this separation is necessary. He shook his head, frustration evident in the set of his shoulders. Zach wants to spend time here, nights, even during the week. Melissa and I have discussed it, and we won't stand in his way. He seems to have a real connection with this place, with gardening. He does. He has a gift for it, just as I did at his age. Yeah, well. James looked away. I guess one good thing came out of all this mess. He found his passion. A pause. He never connected with anything like that before. Not sports or music or any of the things I tried to interest him in. For the first time in weeks, I glimpsed the son I'd raised, the thoughtful man beneath the entitled behavior that had emerged during their extended stay. Different people find meaning in different pursuits, James. Your father loved working with his hands, building things. You preferred team sports and business. Zach's heart is in growing things. It's all valuable. He nodded slowly. I should go. They're waiting. James. I stopped him as he turned to leave. This rift between us, it doesn't have to be permanent, but healing will require genuine understanding of why what happened was so devastating to me. Not just surface apologies or attempts to minimize the loss. Something flickered in his eyes, not quite understanding, but perhaps the beginning of it. I'll think about that. Goodbye, Mom. I watched them drive away, James in the moving truck, Melissa and Emma in their SUV, Zach's lanky frame visible in the back seat, his head turned to watch the house until they rounded the corner and disappeared. The silence they left behind felt sacred, like a cathedral emptied after a tumultuous service. I walked through each room slowly, reacquainting myself with my home as it existed without the constant presence of others. In the kitchen, I found a small pot of purple violets on the counter beside the abandoned keys. Zach's parting gift, no doubt. Outside, the golden late afternoon light bathed the yard in a honeyed glow. The greenhouse gleamed, its aluminum frame catching the sun. No longer empty, it now held the beginnings of a new collection. Salvaged plants, newly propagated specimens, and the precious seedlings Zach had rescued and tended. Beside it, the rectangular outline of bare earth where my garden shed had stood now featured neat stakes and string, marking the dimensions of the larger, improved structure the insurance settlement would fund. From destruction, renewal. From loss, opportunity. From painful endings, new beginnings. Publication in a respected scientific volume, the kind of professional recognition I'd never sought but secretly desired. I'd be honored. There's more. Dr. Moore turned to Zach. The conference organizers are particularly interested in intergenerational knowledge transfer. They've suggested including a youth perspective. Specifically, they'd like Zach to participate in our presentation, discussing his experience learning these propagation techniques through family tradition enhanced by scientific methodology. Zach's eyes widened. Me? Present at a national conference? If you're interested, Dr. Moore said. It would look extremely impressive on your college application, not to mention provide valuable professional experience. Yes, definitely yes. Zach looked to me, excitement battling with disbelief on his face. Grandma, can you believe this? I squeezed his shoulder, pride swelling in my chest. I can. You've earned this recognition with your dedication and insight. After discussing preliminary details of the conference presentation, Dr. Moore departed, leaving Zach and me to finish our Fern division in a state of shared elation. As we cleaned up our workstation, Zach's phone buzzed with a text message. His expression sobered as he read it. Everything okay? I asked. It's Dad. He's asking if I can come to the apartment tonight instead of staying here. Says they need to discuss something important with me. He looked up, concern evident in his eyes. Should I go? Of course you should. They're your parents. And if they need to talk with you about something important, you should be there. He nodded, though reluctance showed in the set of his shoulders. I'll pack up my stuff. I walked him to the door 30 minutes later, giving him a warm hug before he headed to the bus stop. Call me if you need anything. And congratulations again on the conference invitation. That's a significant achievement. His smile returned briefly. Thanks, Grandma, for everything. After he left, the house felt emptier than usual. I puttered in the kitchen, preparing a simple dinner and pondering what important discussion James and Melissa might be having with their son. Financial matters most likely, given their recent struggles. Perhaps they were considering moving to a less expensive apartment further from town, which would impact Zach's school attendance and his time with me. The telephone rang as I was washing my dinner dishes. James's name appeared on the caller ID, an unusual occurrence, as we rarely spoke directly despite the regular exchange of Zach between our households. Hello, James, I answered, keeping my tone neutral. Mom. His voice sounded strained. I need to talk to you about something important. In person, if possible. Is everything all right? Is Zach okay? Zach's fine. It's about our living situation. Things aren't working out at the apartment. The rent increases next month, and with Emma moving out, we're struggling to cover it. I waited, sensing there was more to this call than a financial update. James sighed heavily. Look, I know things have been difficult between us, but I was hoping, would it be okay if I came over tomorrow to talk? Without Melissa. Just you and me. Something in his tone, a humility I hadn't heard from my son in years, made me say yes. We agreed he would come for coffee the following morning. I slept poorly that night, my dreams filled with tangled garden paths that led in circles. When I finally rose at dawn, I felt unrested but resolute. Whatever James wanted to discuss, I would listen with an open mind but firm boundaries. He arrived precisely at 10, parking his truck at the curb rather than in the driveway, a small gesture that acknowledged his visitor status. I watched through the living room window as he approached the front door, noting the slump of his shoulders and the new strands of gray at his temples that hadn't been there 3 months ago. "Thank you for seeing me," he said when I opened the door. "It means a lot." I led him to the kitchen, where I'd prepared coffee and set out the cranberry scones he'd always favored. He noticed the new cafe table and chairs that had replaced the dining set he and Melissa had used for years. "The place looks different," he observed, accepting the mug I offered. "Good different. It feels more like it did when Dad was alive." "I've been making changes," I agreed. "Reclaiming the space, you might say." He winced slightly at my choice of words, but nodded. "I can see that. The garden looks amazing from what I could see driving up. That new shed is twice the size of the old one. Better designed, too. Proper insulation, custom storage for specialized equipment." An awkward silence descended as we both sipped our coffee, the weight of unspoken words hovering between us. "Mom," James finally began, setting down his mug. "I owe you an apology. A real one, not the defensive non-apologies I've been making since the greenhouse incident." I remained silent, allowing him space to continue. What we did was wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. We had no right to dispose of your property, regardless of our opinions about its value or purpose. He met my gaze directly. "I've had a lot of time to think these past months. About respect, about boundaries, about what it means to truly support someone versus imposing your own vision on their life." "That's insightful," I said carefully. Not yet ready to offer absolution. Living in that apartment has been eye-opening. The financial strain? Yes. But more than that. The constant awareness that we're in a space that isn't truly ours, that can be taken away if we don't meet our obligations. He shook his head. "We had it so good here, and we didn't even realize it. Instead of appreciating your generosity, we took advantage of it, then destroyed something precious to you when it became inconvenient to our plans." The frank acknowledgement of wrongdoing, the thing I'd been waiting for all these months, landed. With surprising weight, I found myself blinking back unexpected tears. "Thank you for saying that, James. It means a great deal to hear you recognize the true nature of what happened." He nodded, twisting his coffee mug between his palms. "There's more I need to tell. You, Melissa and we're separating. This caught me off guard." "I'm sorry to hear that. It's been coming for a while. The financial stress was the breaking point, but the cracks were there long before. Moving out of here just brought everything to the surface." He sighed. "She's taking a job in Portland. Her sister lives there, has room for her to stay until she finds her own place. And Zach? How does this affect him?" "That's part of what I wanted to discuss with you." James straightened in his chair, his expression earnest. "Zach is thriving. Right now, his grades are the best they've ever been. This research work he's doing with you and Dr. Moore, it's transformed him, given him purpose and confidence I've never seen before." I nodded, pride warming my chest. "He has a genuine gift for the work." "He does, and I don't want to disrupt that, especially with only 8 months left before he graduates." James took a deep breath. "I wanted to ask if you'd consider having him live with you full-time, at least until graduation." The request stunned me into momentary silence. "I know it's a lot to ask," James continued quickly, "especially after everything that's happened. But with Melissa moving to Portland and me downsizing to a 1-bedroom place I can actually afford, it would give him stability during his senior year. Let him continue the research work and college preparation without disruption." "What does Zach think of this idea?" "We discussed it last night. He was concerned about me being alone, but I could tell he wanted to say yes. A small, sad smile crossed James's face. He lights up when he talks about the greenhouse projects, you know? Gets this look that reminds me of how you used to look when showing Dad and me your latest horticultural triumph. The observation, so perceptive, so unexpectedly tender, caught me off guard. Perhaps James had been paying more attention over the years than I'd realized. Of course Zach can live here, I said. This has always been his home too. But James... What about you? Where will you go? He shrugged. I found a small apartment near the warehouse. It's nothing special, but it's what I can afford on my own. I'll be fine. Looking at my son, truly seeing him perhaps for the first time in years, I recognized the cost of pride. His shoulders carried new burdens, his eyes held new shadows. The entitled man-child who had so casually dismissed my passion had been replaced by someone humbled by consequence, someone finally learning lessons that should have been mastered decades earlier. The garage apartment, I said, the words emerging, before I'd fully formed the thought. The one we discussed converting for Emma before everything happened. James looked confused. What about it? It could be converted now, properly, with permits and professional contractors, a small separate living space that would provide privacy while keeping you close to Zach during his senior year. Hope flickered across his face, quickly suppressed. Mom, I couldn't ask for that. Not after what we did. You're not asking. I'm offering. And it wouldn't be free. You'd pay reasonable rent that would help cover the conversion costs over time. I held up a hand as he began to protest. This isn't about you and me, James. It's about what's best for Zach. He needs stability and support from both his father and his grandmother during this important year. You'd really do that? After everything? Families are complicated, James. Relationships get damaged, trust gets broken. But with genuine remorse and changed behavior, healing becomes possible. I gestured toward the window, where the autumn garden was visible, preparing for winter's rest before spring's renewal. Nature teaches us that cycles of destruction and regeneration are normal, necessary even. The forest fire that seems devastating creates space for new growth. The pruning that feels harsh redirects energy towards stronger, healthier branches. James nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. And sometimes people need to be uprooted to recognize when they've been taking fertile ground for granted. Exactly. We spoke for another hour, sketching preliminary plans for the garage conversion, agreeing on boundaries and expectations that would govern our new arrangement. When James finally rose to leave, something had shifted between us. Not a complete healing, but the first tender shoots of reconciliation pushing through soil that had seemed barren only months before. At the door, he paused. I never properly thanked you for what you're doing for Zach. The research opportunity, the college preparation, all of it. You've given him something Melissa and I couldn't. A sense of belonging, of meaningful work. I'm grateful for that, even if I didn't show it before. He's an extraordinary young man, I replied. I'm just providing the conditions for his natural gifts to flourish. Like any good gardener would, James said, a genuine smile creasing his face for the first time since he'd arrived. After he left, I walked through my house, truly my house again, arranged according to my preferences, filled with my chosen furniture, free of the tension that had permeated it for so long. Then I stepped into the backyard, surveying the transformation underway. The new garden shed rising where the old one had stood, the greenhouse humming with research activity. The landscape redesign staked out with colorful flags marking future garden beds. From the street came the sound of a car door closing, then familiar footsteps on the front walk. Zach appeared around the corner of the house, his face alight with complex emotions. Dad called, he said simply. He told me about your conversation. And how do you feel about the possibility of living here full-time, with your father nearby, in the converted garage apartment? His smile bloomed slowly, like a tightly furled bud opening to unexpected sunshine. "It sounds perfect, Grandma. Like everything's found its right place again." I nodded, slipping my arm through his as we walked, toward the greenhouse where new life grew in carefully tended rows. He was right, of course. Everything was finding its proper place, not through force or manipulation, but through the natural consequences of actions freely chosen. They had given away my gardening supplies to free up space. In doing so, they had set in motion a chain of events that freed up much more: physical space, emotional space, relational space. Room for boundaries to be established, for consequences to be felt, for growth to emerge from cleared ground. The greenhouse door opened to welcome us, warm air scented with damp soil and green life enveloping us like an embrace. Inside, the endangered seedlings stretched toward the light, their genetic code carrying ancient wisdom into an uncertain future. Like them, our family had been threatened, partially uprooted, forced to adapt. Like them, we would endure, finding new ways to thrive. In altered circumstances, the space had been freed. Now we would see what grew within it. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.